Without further ado, my name is Michel Botsong. I work for the AFC. I'm currently heading the joint initiative between AFC and UNHCR about private sector solution in forced displacement. I would like turning towards you, Raouf Mazou. You are the Assistant High Commissioner for Operations at UNHCR. You had a prestigious career at UNHCR, starting in the field in many locations. So we would like to hear from you, and I would give you the floor to tell us in your own terms, why does it matter for a humanitarian agency to pull more private sector businesses into the space? Thank you.
I think it does, yeah. No, thank you. That's okay. I think it's okay. No, thank you very much, Michel. Very, very pleased to be here. And as you said, speaking on this very compelling.
They're trying to mimic the situation in the field. So
I think it's quieter in the field, and but very pleased to be here. And as you said, Michel, it is indeed a very, very compelling topic. And particularly because of the potential that we actually see for private sector to be engaged in forced displacement. A few years ago, it wasn't really possible to even imagine something of that nature. But today, we see that there is potential, there is understanding, and we see a full room of people coming to hear how private sector can play a role in forced displacement. The reality globally is unfortunately that we are having 117 million forcibly displaced. We've never seen this kind of numbers, but that's unfortunately a reflection of the crisis that you see all over the world. And the result of that is to see millions of people finding themselves in situation of limbo, in unsustainable condition, refugee camps in some cases, living in cities in the worst condition in some other cases. But having worked for UNHCR for over 30 years, there is a clear change that we've seen. First, initially, what we were seeing was a majority of refugees living in rural setting, mainly camps. And that we've seen a change. We now have about 60% of the displaced population, refugee population, living in camps. The other thing is the time that people stay in displacement. We're seeing a continuous increase. Yesterday, somebody was talking about 30 years of people who find themselves in displacement. I'm not sure if we've reached such a number, but indeed, the time that people are spending in displacement is increasing. The other thing that was the case before continues to be the case, the fact that about 90% of displacement takes place in middle income and low income countries. So why are we talking about private sector? Yesterday, I think during the start of the forum, there was a clear consensus that one cannot continue to only use humanitarian response or humanitarian action to respond to crisis. And that's now a consensus. So we've had and we've seen from the bank very heavy involvement in a number of situations, new facilities that have been developed and put in place. But what I would say has been missing so far is the private sector element of things. So when we talk about private sector, it's not just the external private sector playing a role in forced displacement. Is how you consider and understand the person who finds herself or himself in a situation of displacement is an economic actor, is somebody who is actually an actor of the private sector and wants to be considered as such. So that shift is something that we can see happening now. And the conversation that we're going to have today now, I think, is going to underline that. The Global Compact on Refugees, which was adopted in 2018 or affirmed in 2018 by the General Assembly, actually made specific reference to the role that private sector would need to play in finding solutions, job creation, entrepreneurship, empowering refugees, and their integration in national economies. It's clear that, and we'll probably hear that again from the conversation, we have to do that shift. the private sector is best equipped to make sure that that shifts happen from dependency to humanitarian assistance to self-reliance. Michel made reference to the joint initiative that we put in place about a year ago in Turkey, in Istanbul. Michel is here, Ferdila, deputy, is here. She's from UNHCR, he's from IFC. We brought them together and we put in place that initiative to really try to unlock everywhere. First, to try to get colleagues to understand that when one says private sector, when you are a humanitarian worker, that when you hear private sector, it's not necessarily something bad, to the contrary, but to explain that, to do this kind of translation. And they will be playing that role. They've started playing that role already for 1 year. We will have a very diverse panel, and very much looking forward to hearing from them. But before I conclude, I would like to specifically thank the Dutch for the role that you've been playing, for being an ardent supporter of innovative approaches in refugee context. You've been there from the beginning through various initiatives, and thank you again for continuing to play that role. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raouf, for setting the stage and making the case for private sector engagement. So I would suggest that we now move to our panelists who will be illustrating from a private sector business perspective why they are present in that space. Let me start with Maciej Reluga. You are the Chief Financial Officer of Bank Santander Polska. You are joining us from there. Thanks for that. You have been engaged very innovatively at channeling cash solutions to Ukrainian refugees. You have recently also started working with IFC at extending loans to Ukrainian managed businesses. What's the business case for a commercial bank like Santander Polska to engage with that new type of audience? And once the business case is established, what does it take for you to operate successfully with this new target group? Please.
Thank you. Thanks for invitation. Thank you for having me. I hope to bring some European perspective in the context of the war in Ukraine. And I think the solutions which we proposed to refugees over the last 2 years, I think fits well into the context presented in the opening speech, from humanitarian crisis and the refugee crisis into, let's say, refugees already functioning in the economy very well. And depending on the situation, I would distinguish our actions and solutions at the very beginning, let's say 2 years ago, from what we have now and our agreement with the IFC directed towards individuals and the SMEs, which were created by the Ukrainians in Poland. First of all, actually, it's worth to remind maybe that the war in Ukraine is already 10 years long. And even before this full-scale intervention of Russia in Ukraine 2 years ago, there were many Ukrainians in Poland. It was like a couple of hundreds of thousands of them, which was mostly economic migration. And then when 2 years ago the full-scale invasion happened, the first thing and the solution we found, and here the cooperation with the UNHCR about the cash transfer to refugees. The problem was that when they were coming, and the scale we're talking about the last 2 years, annual cross borders, it's around 10 million, which is 3 times higher than in the previous year. At the peak in March 22, 150,000 people crossing the border. And there was a need of transfer money from United Nations Refugee Agency to these people. And of course, they had no bank application, they had no bank account, they had no credit card, etc. So based on our quite, I would say, interesting technological solution of the instant payments and the transfers of money between the people, which is functioning in Poland for the last 9 years, we built a special solution, cash assistance to these refugees, so everybody could have received 9-digit code by text message and go with this code to the ATM and receive the money. And we helped. The number of this BLIK, the so-called BLIK checks, was close to 500,000 checks. And going back to your question, there was no business case for this. This is not for the business case. We just did the right thing, and there were no fees. There was no additional elements. We built a technological solution to help people in very, very difficult time. Now, 2 years after, Of course, many Ukrainians are staying in Poland. Many of them moved to the Western Europe. Some of them went back to Ukraine, but still around 1 million people which came in the last 2 years, they are still in Poland. Many of them established the companies. I think around 10% of newly established SMEs and micro companies in the last 2 years, these are the companies owned by Ukrainians. If you look at the opinion polls among them, out of the pre-war, let's say, economic migration, 60% of Ukrainians would like to stay in Poland permanently or at least for a couple of years. Out of those coming in the last 2 years, the refugees, we are talking about 1/3, 40% of people staying probably permanently in Poland. So they are using the bank financial services. They have a need for products and services from the banks, cash loans, mortgages, current accounts, etc. I think, frankly, due to the actions from the very beginning, which we take, our share on the market of the current accounts of Ukrainians is twice as high as our natural market share for the other products on the market. But because of this integration of individuals and entrepreneurs from Ukraine in the economy, yes, we signed this agreement with the IFC, which is about securitization or guarantee of our existing portfolio of cash loans, which releases the capital, which is important here. The business case is needed, and the released capital needs to be cheaper than our cost of capital. And we use this capital exactly for products, for credits, for loans directed to Ukrainians, individuals, mostly mortgages, also SMEs. And also there is I think a novelty element here that we can also provide the loan to Polish companies which are employing the refugees. Yes, so this is an additional, I think, interesting element in this. So as you can see, our actions were different depending on the moment, on the situation. It was different story at the very beginning, and now I would say while the Ukrainians already well integrated, at least part of them in the Polish economy, there was a need for a market solution directed to them, which we provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Maciek. Let us then move to Douglas Cox, who is the Director of the Africa Project Development, Renewable Energy. You are a developer of off-grid renewable energy solutions. You're operating in challenging markets, including in an area that is populated by many refugees in northern Kenya, as you can see on the screen. So, Doug, tell us about what you're providing renewable energy solution. You're operating in and around refugee camps. Again, what's the business case? What's the model? And then if you can tell us maybe a little bit about the impact it may have on the broader economy, the provision of the solution that you put in place.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, like he said, my name's Douglas Cox, and I work for Renewable Energy. We're a US-based solar company headquartered in Atlanta, but then also active in Kenya and Nigeria, and expanding this year to Ethiopia and DRC. I work exclusively on Africa projects, and we mostly do community electrification through solar mini grids. So just a quick bit of context. I bet a lot of people in this room probably know Kakuma Refugee Camp quite well, but for those who don't, the camp was founded in 1992, kind of as a combination of pre-existing camps that had been there throughout Kenya since the 60s, kind of just tracing the history of Sudanese independence and then South Sudanese independence and all the conflicts that they've had from that. And so we started in 2019. We started in Kakuma Refugee Camp in 2019. We built the first source of energy for refugees in the camp. The Kenyan National Utility won't sell to refugees as just as a policy matter. And so when we built our first solar mini grid for 500 homes and businesses, that was the only source of electricity for refugees. We expanded then in 2022 to cover about 3,000 homes and businesses. That was with funding from IFC through the KKCF program, KKCF standing for Kalube Kakuma Challenge Fund. Then we're expanding this year with some EU funding, and we're going to cover about 17,000 homes and businesses. When I say cover, we sell electricity, just normal grid electricity. It's all generated from solar, stored in batteries, over 99% renewable, and over 99%, way more than 99% reliable. Customers pay us with M-Pesa, Kenya's mobile money solution, and they prepay for their electricity. So they top up. They have smart meters that are connected to the internet. That meters their electricity. It's all a very nice, scalable and automatic system, and so far quite financially sustainable for us. The difference between a refugee camp for us versus the other communities that we serve in Africa is that the rest are much smaller and usually a lot less dense. The economies of scale we're getting with having such a large collection of customers is just really extraordinary, and it just works out really well for us. I'm so excited about covering 17,000 connections at the end of this year, but that is still less than 1/3 of the population of the camp. And then we haven't even mentioned the host community nearby. We have a smaller mini grid that does serve a host community village down the road. But in terms of meeting the needs of the region, we have so much more growth in that area that we want to do because it's good work. And it's also, like I said, financially sustainable for us, which is great. You asked about the impact. I think, some of this, at least in my world, because I'm in, the rural electrification space, and in our conferences, we sound like broken records talking about, once our services come online, then people have the ability to do their homework at night and they can charge their phones without walking 5 kilometers and things like that, right? And all of that is so true and so real. I think what's been interesting in the refugee camp is just seeing the entrepreneurial spirit of refugees in particular. It's such an interesting cross-section of the societies that they came from, mostly from South Sudan, but also significant portions from every country in the region. People don't just charge their phones and turn on lights. They start businesses. They chill drinks. It's really hot up there. You're all welcome to come visit during construction this year, and you'll see what I mean. And you'll be really glad that you can have cold drinks now. There's, of course, people watching movies, people showing football games, but bigger stuff too, carpentry, furniture making, things like that. We have a bank branch, and then maybe some of my favorite clients, obviously health clinics, and then Safaricom, the local telco. We power a few of their towers. And this is anecdotal, but I think it makes sense. I saw during testing earlier on when our system would shut off sometimes and then turn back on, that the signal from the tower would drop from 4G that was relatively fast for Kenya to a super slow 3G whenever our power was off. It kind of makes sense, right? The tower was just going to its backup systems, conserving energy. And I guess that just to say and to close with, it's been amazing to watch how with our power, people can't just charge their phones. Everybody's phone gets faster when we have our power. And I think that's just a good sort of metaphor almost for how energy, when it is accessible to a community, how it can transform everything.
Thanks a lot, Doug. You made a compelling case. We have heard from you about access to key services like electricity. We have heard from Santander Polska about financial inclusion. Let me turn towards you. Ragia, you are part of the managing team of Flat Six Labs. You are running a very successful incubator model across Egypt, and you have decided to take that to the Middle East, to the Mashrek, to cover countries like Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, where you have also decided to include an element of entrepreneurship support, access, startup support to refugee managed businesses. So could you tell us more about that? How is it working, and what does it require to tap into that specific audience?
Definitely. Thank you so much. My name is Ragia. I'm leading the Start Mashrek initiative focused on Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon. This program is funded by funded and supported by the Dutch government and the IFC. I just want to give you like a bit of context about what do we do in the project itself, and then tap into how do we support refugees. So Start Mashrek is an online platform that is divided into several tracks. So we have the education track where anyone can go on and register on the platform. They have access to courses, articles, blogs about entrepreneurship. And we help them even know more about entrepreneurship in order to, if they have an idea, they can grow it. And if they don't have an idea, we give them ideation sessions in order to come up with an idea. And another track is the incubation program, where people and entrepreneurs from the 3 countries, they apply, and then they go on to the 3-month incubation program where we give them training, mentorship, coaching in order to scale up their business. In the incubation program, we have a specific focus on refugees and females in order to come into our program. When someone hears about word incubation, they always think that it's an idea stage or it's just a startup who has an idea. But before we run on the incubation program, we run ideation sessions where we get startups and we help them know more about entrepreneurship and how to come up with an idea. So at the very beginning, we had the idea of that we're going to run especially that refugees, we had in mind that they just have an idea or they don't have an idea and we have to help them come up with an idea. But in our events that we run before the incubation program, it was very interesting to see that actually a lot of refugees, they actually have an idea, they have an MVP or a product that's up and running. So, and when we run a needs assessment before the incubation, a lot of them, more than 70%, they're asking for legal support, they're asking for investment, they're asking for funding. So we started to pivot the idea of we're just going to take idea stage startups to higher stage startups where they have an actual product, and we're going to help them scale up their business, and we connect them with investors. So it's not an accelerator, it's somewhere between an incubation and accelerator, where we start helping them register their business, where we connect them with mentors, with trainers, in order to grow up their business, not just to have an idea. So an example of a success story from our first cycle is actually a Syrian refugee. He fled from Syria to Jordan in 2011 after war. And he always wanted to, he was always eager to start his own business and to pitch in front of a lot of people. He was always applying to incubation cycles. He had an idea of a platform where businesses can go on, or individuals, and sell up their used stuff. He applied in our cycle, and after the incubation program, he's actually generating revenue, and we're helping him scale up even more and apply to accelerators in order to get funding. So there's a huge potential in the market. We thought that refugees will be at an earlier stage than other entrepreneurs, but actually they have the will and they have the potential to grow and actually be like all the other entrepreneurs in the Mashriq region. And this is what we're trying to do in the program. We're trying to encourage them even further. We have unified sessions, especially for FDPs, and we're getting them entrepreneurs that are actually successful refugees and that they have a huge business, in order to inspire them and tell them that you can be there and you can actually grow and do your own business and you're like everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Ragia. Let me turn towards Pablo Moreno, who is joining us from online from Mexico. Pablo, you are the Vice President for Corporate Affairs at Mabe. Mabe is a pretty large and very successful, dynamic Mexican company which designs and produces and distributes appliances across the world. Pablo, my question to you is that we have the feeling, and we heard that in the Fragility Forum so far, that the window to a certain extent for refugee inclusion is shrinking a little bit. The context is becoming more challenging. You are in charge of a company which is actually actively trying to increase the number of refugees working for your company. So what's the business case? So if you could kindly tell us more about your approach and why does it make sense so much for Mabe? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and allow me to start by please accept my apologies for not being able to be there in person, but we will try our best to share our experience through this media. And also allow me to start saying it's an honor to be here, part of this distinguished panel representing Mabe. And I think it's very important to start off by saying that Mexico stands at a key moment in history, positioned as a business pole in the global economy, through the nearshoring trend. This phenomenon, amplified by the strategic advantages offered by the USMCA agreement with the United States and Canada, has positioned our nation not just as a neighbor, but as a premier production hub for the Americas and also beyond. So our extensive network of free trade agreements opens unparalleled opportunities for growth, investment, and innovation. So this is a very important point to make clear. So in this landscape of growing economic prospects, a unique opportunity emerges for refugees. Mexico's economic outlook is fertile ground for those seeking to rebuild their lives and contribute to our shared prosperity. That's an important issue. So because of this, we started an initiative back in 2017, working hand in hand with our partners at the UNHCR's office in Mexico, together with the government of the state of Coahuila and the Mexican Commission for Refugee Aid. So what we started is a movement with the support of our company, and now from 2017 to now 2024, we have over 600 companies that have incorporated into the initiative. And I say our initiative not lightly, as we feel not only part of this movement, but advocates, as we invite each of you to reflect on the role you can play in this exciting chapter of our shared history. So at MAVE, we recognize the immense value that comes from diversity and the fresh perspectives that refugees bring to our company. Their resilience, talent, and determination enriches our company's culture and enhances the competitiveness within our workforce by giving them by example, So our experience at MAVE has shown that employing refugees brings substantial benefits. So we have noticed remarkable low employee turnover rates among refugees, which highly speaks about the culture of belonging within the company. Moreover, refugees have a positive influence on our entire workforce because they value the fact that they have been given a second chance at life for them, and not only for them, but also for their families, thus becoming beacons of commitment and role models of tenacity because of this opportunity. So their dedication to MAVE is contagious. They inspire the colleagues and contribute to more cohesive and motivated teams. It is a fact. We've seen it at the factory. And we at MAVE work hand in hand with the UNHCR and the government bodies to ensure that the refugees can become integral members of the community we serve. This is a very important fact for success. We need to provide jobs, access to housing, credits, schools, and other primary needs, and we help to integrate them into the social fabric, not as outsiders, but as neighbors and friends. And this is a key factor. So our commitment to inclusivity goes beyond just employment. It's about integration, empowerment, and creating pathways for refugees not only to participate, but to thrive within our economy. So the nearshoring trend I was referring to a moment ago, while primarily it's an economic movement, it offers us a profound social opportunity. It allows us to reimagine our workforce, to build bridges where walls might have stood, and to show the world that economic growth and humanitarian principles can not only coexist, but to flourish together. This is very, very important. So as members of the USMCA and as a nation blessed with a strategic, geographical, and economic position, we have responsibility to leverage these advantages, not just for our own benefit, but for the greater good of humanity. So the story of Mexico in the 21st century, we're convinced of this, will be one of innovation, resilience, and inclusivity, and refugees will be an integral part of this narrative. So let me just also say that it's important to emphasize that everyone has a key role to play. Governments must continue to support the solution of the administrative challenges that allow refugees to benefit from this program. Companies must continue to join this cause as the number of refugees continue to grow all over the world. And the UNHCR must continue to work as a glue that binds all of these players together. So allow me to say, Michelle, to finish, to let us collaborate, innovate, and work towards a future where everyone, regardless of their origin, can share in the prosperity that our nations have to offer. So allow me to say thanks, and let us look forward for our future built on solidarity, resilience, and shared success. This is just simply a win-win situation for everyone. Michael, thank you very much for giving us the word.
Thank you very much, Pablo. That's a very compelling and very strong message that deserves to be dispatched more broadly, and we'll make sure that it's being heard in other parts of the world too. So we have heard from our 4 distinguished panelists about specific examples in specific geographies, access to services, financial inclusion, entrepreneurship, employability. I would like to have a second round of questions to our panelists and ask them to actually step out from their specific role and reflect a little bit more about, based on your specific experience, how can we scale that up in terms of the industry you're operating into? What would it take to actually scale it up so that we don't just have one great example, but we can have an impact much more largely and in a more sustainable way? Let me maybe start with you and with Doug. From your specific perspective, what would be required to scale up this type of interventions that you
have? First of all, we run different on-ground and online events in the program across the 3 countries. And we realized that on ground, we get more refugees than the online events. So we started to see what is the problem, and it comes to like actual access to internet. So they don't have the sufficient, or they don't have the accessibility to get the internet connection. A lot of them, they don't have smartphones in order to be able to register and fill out the questions and come and attend the event. So we started to make sure that the people have access to internet. We, with all the support of our on-ground partners in the 3 countries, they reach out to these refugees and we give them internet access in order to be able to attend our online events. And also in our on-ground events, if it's far away from the camps or it's far away from where they live, they don't come. So we started to offer transportation for them to be able to come and join our events. So internet access, transportation is a huge barrier to a lot of them in order to be able to have access to these sessions and attend these events. So this is the first thing. Second thing, they always want to see relevant stories and relevant successful people that are refugees. So in the events where we get them an example of someone from their community that share the same norms and they share the same culture and they share the same stories, they're very interested to come and see the story, and they get encouraged of that they can see someone successful that they can relate to and that they can look up to. So this was also one of very important lessons learned in order to attract this community to be part of our program and our events, that they see like not different people, but people from that they share the same norms and the culture. A lot of them have a lot of difficulties in terms of registering their business. A lot of government constraints on how to actually scale up and register their business, and this stops them for actually talking to investors and getting funding. So this is what we're trying to do at the moment in order to help them register their business, in order to help them grow. So we're not looking at just having an idea, but they actually have an idea, but they can't scale it up because they're not registered as a startup. So this is the third thing that we're tapping into, that legal support and how we can help them to do this. Another thing is having access to people who can actually fund their startup or like give them investment. So at the moment, what we're doing is the people who are not ready for investment, we give them access to apply for competitions, for grants, where they can get little funding to support them to even grow a little bit until they get actual investments. So this is what we're trying to do at the moment. But what we're trying to do also is the refugees that are ready actually for investment, to connect them with relevant investors that would be actually interested to fund their startups.
Thank you, Raga. It's very clear. I think the importance of the ecosystem, the access to the internet, importance of positive role models, and highlighting the regulatory framework as a key enabler for business interventions. Doug, in 2 minutes, what does it take to make an off-grid renewable energy solution provider operating in a refugee setting as a profitable business that can expand?
Okay, how about 1 minute for the Kakuma area and 1 minute for all of Africa? And then another minute for the world, if you'll give it to me. In Kakuma, right now we're operationally profitable. After this year's expansion with powering almost 100,000 people, we'll be returning something reasonable to our equity investors and paying off a loan that will support this year's construction. So that's a success story in its own. But I did not yet say, and then putting money into further expansion funds, right? There's an economy of scale that we have not reached yet, where customer revenues are going to be paying for the next expansion. We're not there yet. And so for the Kakuma area, we need funding, and we need it, obviously, as much grant funding as is available would be the best, right? But also patient equity or concessional lending are both things that we're incredibly interested in. I know I'm here in the middle of Bretton Woods, and there might be some deep pockets. So if anybody has 15 million for me of any kind, of any blend, I could power the whole region, and I would love to do that. And I think it's a really good case. So come find me afterwards. Onward, though, for other refugee camps in, just throughout, I said Africa because that's where I spend all my time, but, the world, really. I think the regulatory hurdles are less of a hurdle than you might think. As far as I know, we're doing this, and then there's the solar mini grid in Jordan that's doing this, and otherwise mini grids don't tend to have these. Refugee camps don't have special electrification settings. They either have it from the grid or they don't, right? And so if you just go to pick a random setting, pick a random refugee camp and ask, hey, government, is this allowed? Can a private sector build a solar mini grid and provide electricity to all the refugees here? I'm sure they'll say no, but that's just because this is a really strange thing to do. And with just a little bit of conversation and a little bit of, just engaging with regulators, this is usually possible. So I'll actually repeat that the same thing we need in the Kakuma area is the same thing we need anywhere, is just more funding. And we can certainly do it. And I think we're not the only ones, but we certainly do have some expertise and some experience in this, and would love to.
Thanks, Doug. Majek, if you reflect on the broader industry and commercial banks, what does it require for commercial banks to actually serve refugee audiences, both individuals, families, households, but also entrepreneurs, the way you do it? Any tips, any advice for our audience today?
I think on scaling up, our agreement from autumn last year was just top up upsize of existing agreement we had on a bigger scale. And let's say, maybe I shouldn't say testing the ground on a smaller scale. How does it work? And I'm sure we will deliver very soon the loans to Ukrainians. And then I believe there will be a room for a separate, bigger deal dedicated for this part of the, Polish population or Ukrainian population in Poland. And also, well, we have 20% share of current accounts of Ukrainians in Poland. What about the next 80%? So there is a room for IFC, I believe, to cooperate with other Polish banks as well to do the similar solutions. And maybe two messages to the private sector in general from our experience. I think synchronization of action is very important. It's not really about the competition between the banks and not only financial sector. It's about synchronization of the actions, also with the support of the regulator, because in Poland, when this full-scale invasion of Russia happened at the end of February, already at the beginning of March, we had agreed standards of how to support Ukrainian refugees among all of the banks. And there was a letter from the regulator how to do this, and no fees from inbound, outbound transfers, no fees for current accounts, etc., etc. So that's one. And second, I think thinking outside the box, because if you ask me if I would expect this bleak transfer technology, that this can be used to support refugees like 3 years ago, I wouldn't think about this. But when the problem appeared, it turned out that we made a couple of adjustments and there was a big success in terms of helping people. And what's more, this technology was used later by other agencies and foundations to transfer money to people in need coming from Ukraine. So it showed up that sometimes we have a solution maybe on the table or close, and not a lot of adjustment are needed to make a big change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our responsibility will be to make sure that those type of solutions, these type of innovations are known and applied across the globe in all those contexts. Pablo, if I may turn towards you, and I think you made such a compelling case, maybe reflecting on what can be done to actually convey the same message and convince some of your peers managing large businesses in middle income developed economies to actually consider hiring more refugees. Any guidance, any message of hope, any practical solution to take that forward and replicate your example in other locations?
Thank you, Michel. Well, one of the issues that we encountered when we started, Michel, and this is very important towards your question, is the lack of trust. We must, and I believe that when we've been working since 2017 with many companies to invite them to hire refugees, basically this is the first issue that comes up, lack of trust. And let me give you an example. Even us, we must admit that at the beginning we had several concerns about the effectiveness of the initiative. And don't get me wrong, and let me explain. On one hand, we were concerned that it would be used by refugees as a springboard to migrate to the United States. In our case, especially because due to the proximity of the city of Saltillo to the border. And that was I believe, one of the main worries of Mexican companies, having those people, the refugees, being hired and using us as springboard to migrate to the United States. And on the other hand, the second worriness that we have seen in the companies would be the fact that some refugees could have formed part of illicit activities in their countries of origin. So I can tell you that after 5 years of being part of this program, we were completely wrong. And I believe that once each one of the companies that come into the program realize that this is not true, they become more effective in hiring refugees. And the reason why this works is due to the effectiveness of the incorporation process carried out by the UNHCR. It's a process that is completely effective and reliable. So this will be one of the first or most important hurdles to put aside when we encounter and invite new companies. And the second situation we also encounter is not the lack of interest of the companies to hire refugees, because one of the immediate results that the companies experience, other than the ones I have already mentioned, is the turnover. The turnover, let me give you an example. In the state of Coahuila, we have a turnover of more or less 10%, 10.5% monthly percent of turnover in the state of Coahuila. In Mabe, in the state of Coahuila, in our manufacturing plant there, we must have like a 5.5% turnover. And within the group of refugees that became part of Mabe's family is around 0.8% turnover. And because of this not necessarily means that they leave to other countries. They leave for better opportunities, or some of them have had to go back to their countries. But it's a very important turnover that allows company also to be part with more enthusiasm, in a very much enthusiastic way of this program. And basically, I can go on, Michelle, but I don't know if these two comments would emphasize what you ask.
Thanks a lot, Pablo. I think your testimonial is absolutely key, and those are key examples. And I think there will be much more compelling coming from you talking to your peers than if we try to convey the same message. So we will follow up on that. Let me invite to the stage Robert Piper, who is the special representative of the UN Secretary General on internally displaced persons solution. And I think the crisis, the forced displacement crisis, the numbers going through the roof are to a large extent driven by the internally displaced persons crisis. So, Robert, you have been exposed to private businesses doing this type of providing these solutions and inclusion of refugees. Does it make sense for IDPs? Is it replicable? What is your analysis?
Thank you, Michelle and Ralph, and thank you all for this opportunity to come to provoke and to challenge, as it were. What we heard, I think, is incredibly dynamic, creative responses by the private sector. Absolutely, Michelle, it absolutely resonates completely with the issues that we're trying to deal with. How many people in this room realize that 75 million of the 117 million that Ralph spoke of, forcibly displaced people, are internally displaced? They haven't crossed a border. They are very much like refugees in the sense that they've lost their homes, they've lost their assets, they've lost their community. In many cases, they've lost their identity and their documentation, but they haven't crossed a border. They're still in their countries, in camps, in towns, with relatives perhaps, and like refugees find themselves in these situations for years, sometimes in the case of Colombians, decades, caught in this sort of limbo, very, very vulnerable, and stuck in this protracted displacement situation. I've been given the job with a number of agencies like UNHCR, IOM, the UN Development Programme, working with the World Bank and other banks very closely to figure out how do we manage this growing problem. The number of internally displaced has doubled in the last 10 years, just keeps going up. It's conflict, it's climate and disasters, it's a combination of the two. And we've been given the job of trying to figure out how do we move more people out of this protracted displacement situation. We're doing it by testing new approaches, working with 15 governments around the world, many of them participating here. It includes countries like Colombia, Iraq, Libya, big countries, middle-income countries. It includes Vanuatu, very small, dealing with sea level rise and its impact. But of course, a lot of countries where disasters and conflict are mixing: Somalia, northeast Nigeria, Libya, and so forth. So we have a whole mixture of countries where we're working very, very closely with governments to figure out how do you break this pattern. A solution for an internally displaced person is not rocket science. It's issues that you're familiar with in this room. It's about putting a roof over someone's head. It's about giving them a livelihood, restoring their assets, and maybe and access to services like health and education. It's not rocket science, but it is expensive, and the scale of the work is enormous when you think about this 75 million people and growing. We've set ourselves a goal of getting 10 million internally displaced people on what we call a solutions pathway across these 15 countries. Just by way of illustration of where I think there is tremendous potential, where we need the private sector, we estimate just for the 15 countries where we are working to pilot, we'll need something like 2 million housing units. That's big business. That's certainly not going to be covered by governments. It's certainly not going to be covered by official development assistance. In Iraq, for example, we've been working with the Ministry of Housing to figure out how do you get funding from the market for about 120,000 units. The government's willing to subsidize. We have IDPs that potentially can carry some of the loan, but of course we need a kind of market solution. Over the coming years, we will have millions of people integrating into neighborhoods in big cities, internally displaced people that are settling with the help of their government in Medellin, in Bogota, in Mogadishu, in Maiduguri, in northeast Nigeria. These urban centers need creative private sector investments in that urban infrastructure. So we have a whole range, I think, of possibilities. So let me just challenge you. I think these are brilliant examples of what can be done. Everyone has spoken of refugees, which is an absolutely crucial entry point on that issue of forcibly displaced people. Now I challenge us all to expand that lens and think about how we can extend some of this great thinking to the 75 million internally displaced people around the globe. So thank you for this opportunity, Michelle.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Let me open the floor for comments and questions that are coming from the audience. We may want to start, maybe if there's an online question that may be asked. Ricardo?
Sure, Michelle. We have a couple of questions. One is about if the panelists can elaborate a little bit more about how working on the inclusion of forcibly displaced populations can also benefit host communities. And the second one is about the challenges that you are facing whenever you are trying to, to support the inclusion of forcibly displaced populations. What are the barriers and challenges that you face, and especially those that can be external, but also internal, that are very much inherent or intrinsic to the nature of your companies? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's maybe take a couple of other questions from the audience. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I'm Elizabeth Campbell, a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department. And the good news is I'm very proud to announce that we are going to support a contribution of $3 billion over the next 2 years for the UNHCR IFC joint initiative, because we believe strongly that the private sector has to be a central part of forced displacement solutions, and it has to be at the start, and it has to be something that all of us working together on these issues and in these spaces think about in our programming, in our policies, in our planning as we move forward. So this is just one way, I think, to move that forward. I guess the question I wanted to ask is, we still have, of course, all of us in our various institutions and bureaucracies, quite a ways to go to forge the pathway forward, right? We have different expertise, different specialties, different requirements in terms of how funding is spent. On this specific initiative, of course, we're a humanitarian donor. It's relatively easy for us to provide support on the humanitarian side. But how do you see on the sort of IFC side of this initiative, support coming from that channel? And how can we make sure that it is as robust? Because any humanitarian assistance we provide, is coming out of a pot that is intended, obviously, for urgent needs, even though, of course, as mentioned, we see this as extremely important. So if you could just maybe comment a little bit on that side of the equation. Thanks.
Maybe one last question.
Hello, my name is Kimama Myo, and I'm the Minister of Commerce from the National Unity Government of Myanmar, exile government. And under my ministry, to address the forced displacement challenge, we have developed the job creation and income generation committee, as well as women's economic empowerment program, and then SME center in conflict affected areas. But I found a lot of challenges along with the communities, refugee and IDP communities from Burma. The first one is for the job seeker, they have found some challenges related to the IT and certification problem. Even though they are qualifying, they do not have any certification to be re-employed, and then they need this certification problem. And another one is for the producer. Even though they have done a lot of crafts and then other business program, there is a lack of quality infrastructure to export to other countries, and as well as access to finance, and then access to credit, as well as market access for the commodity and services, and some regulatory challenges for the refugee-led social enterprise. Now I'm trying to establish the MSME fund to help the refugees, but actually regulatory challenges in Thailand, in Thailand-Burma border, and then China-Burma border, and then also in India-Burma border. These are the challenges, and I would like to ask, how could we effectively address in terms of the international community and public-private sector collaboration? Thank you very much.
Thank you for highlighting the importance of a very effective ecosystem to enable that. Let me turn to the panel who wants to take the question of host community versus refugee. You see a difference? You see what?
Our answer might be specific to our situation, but I think I briefly mentioned that we did build a solar mini grid in the local Turkana community down the street. But I think a broader point is there to be made about how the refugee camp is the largest human settlement in northern Kenya, just because of just the huge number of refugees, right? And so any economic development that happens in the refugee camp is going to have spillover effects into the host community. And there's a lot of tension around that. It's not always thought of positively. It's not always thought of equitably. It's probably not always done equitably, but it certainly is true that anything that happens for an open, accessible refugee camp is going to spill over well for the host community. I don't know if you two want to add anything.
Just to bring the Polish perspective in the context of Ukrainian refugees, and maybe not everybody is aware, there were no actually refugee camps in Poland, despite a significant flow of 150,000 people at the peak, and Ukrainians, they dispersed across the country very, very quickly, and they found places in people's private homes after 1 or 2 days in the places where they were waiting for the location. And actually then some of them moved to the Western Europe, some of them stayed, and they are active in the economy. And actually there was no even a need for refugee camps in Poland.
If I may add my own take, I don't think that for a private business, for a private company, there's a case to be just working with refugees. I think it's a market opportunity, and refugees, IDPs, can be part of a fraction of the broader clientele and audience they are trying to address, or the workforce they are mobilizing. So I think for me, that's a key element, and gives me a segue to try to address your challenging question, Elizabeth. Thanks first for the US contribution to the program. The point that you are raising, I think, is a key one. If we step back a little bit, today we are together for the Fragility Forum. Fragility was the type of areas where development finance institutions were running away from 15 years ago. And I think there's been a systematic collective effort at trying to identify ways of operating there. IFC today is investing more than $2 billion every year into fragile areas, including into countries in open conflict. So that's happening. And our ambition with the joint initiative is to do the same around forced displacement. Not to do refugee projects, but to do investment projects, solid investment projects with committed clients that deliberately include forcibly displaced refugees, IDPs into their value chain. And to reward, to a certain extent, those companies with forced displacement dividends, support them in the intervention, support them with the investment services, the advisory. And I feel that's starting to happen. If I look at the IFC portfolio, we have today 12 projects that have a deliberate forced displacement angle across geographies. And that space is growing. It's largely driven by financial inclusion. That's where it's working the best, illustrated today. But I think there are areas around access to service, entrepreneurship, agribusiness, which are very promising. So that's the work that we like to do together. And I feel, turning towards you, Raouf, that the partnership helps us being stronger because you bring us what we don't have. You bring us the access to that reality, the understanding and the data, the analytical understanding of that reality, and the protection mandate that you have. The fact that you have a protection mandate for forcibly displaced persons is, to a certain extent, give us some comfort that we have in the room with us a whistleblower that will follow up the situation on the ground, make sure that we work with responsible businesses. So that's the first element of the response, but we can elaborate further. We had a very dynamic, rich session. Let me maybe turn towards you. Barnard and Kate, you are in charge of migration and development at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. The Netherlands, as was highlighted by Raouf and several participants, you play a key role in that space. You have been involved in that space. You have put in place a very large, ambitious program like Prospects. You have also a passion for forced displacement and fragility. So I would like to give you the floor for concluding remarks about what you have heard and your ambition in taking that space forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be the closing part of this very interesting session, a very encouraging session as well. First of all, started off with Raouf. I think you have been I remember our lunch in the port of Amsterdam, famous song by, what is it, Brel, I believe? Explaining this new initiative, and I'm really very proud to have been able to support it with Dutch taxpayer money, and I'm also very happy to hear today the American announcement to also, next to the Danish government, who is also financing this initiative, to do so. And to hear from an organization like UNHCR, who has always been very active also in the humanitarian space, that we need to move towards a more developmental approach involving the private sector, whereby UNHCR plays much more the protection role, like Pablo was also mentioning in Mexico, is of course very powerful. So thank you for that, taking on that role. What did I hear of the panelists? Just a few pinpoint some highlights I heard. Poland, I think it's about technical solutions that we need. We need creativity and innovation to be able to serve the clients. It's also about, I think in Poland, a long-term approach where you did not have a particular business case in the beginning, and later on it translated into a business case. Douglas, I think is more about servicing refugee populations, enabling environment, ensuring that economic growth can take place by providing, in this case, electricity. Flat Labs is about training, innovation as well. All these issues that are necessary to allow some, let's say, economic growth by private sector growth. And Pablo, of course, with a very encouraging story about inclusion of refugees. and also the success that you can have with that is also quite encouraging. I think in the past years we have had a lot of people doubting whether it's possible to do so, and these examples show us that it is possible, and that we need to work hard to scale up those initiatives. Robert was, of course, very right in pointing us out that we concentrate very often on refugees, but in terms of the displaced population in the world, the IDPs is a much larger population, which needs similar type of interventions. Well noted there. I would like to close off with two things I sort of take home. First of all, it's about human rights. I thought it's about, as if those people do not have the same needs and cannot do the same things as any other normal human being. In that sense, I was a bit surprised about the question about host communities, because of course there is a tension. We all, it's no need to deny that, but all these type of interventions are, of course, equally useful for host communities or for refugees. And the last thing, very important, and I have to say, sometimes I wonder why is it that our Latin American friends are somehow a bit ahead of the pack in terms of regulatory framework, because of course, all of these things for refugees to be able to become private entrepreneurs, they need a regulatory environment which allows them to do so, and allows them to register their company or to have working permits. And that is as well where the donor comes in, hopefully a little bit, by providing long-term financing and engaging in a policy dialogue, thereby encouraging host governments to ensure that this regulatory framework is in place to allow these private sector initiatives to flourish. I think that was it for me. Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. Thank you.
Thanks for your very strong words, Werner. Let's then close the session. I would invite the participant to give a hand to Rauf, our host, Ragia, Hugh, Maciek, and Pablo, who have been compelling speakers and panelists today. And I would like to invite you to move to lunch. I'm supposed to make an announcement that I forgot about Senegalese food, which, if you like it as much as I do, I think there's Senegalese food available somewhere. But
downstairs.
The speaker from yesterday. Voila. Thank you.
Hello. So if you want to try Chef Pierre's food, please go down to the MC cafeteria where it is available for purchase. If you want the free food, it's in the